More often than not, we have people who are looking to relocate here to northern Colorado and want the idyllic lifestyle of owning some land, having maybe a cow or two, some chickens, and a garden. And so today we're going to do a deeper dive on owning acreage properties in northern Colorado.
Welcome back to Living in Fort Collins. My name is Connor Martin.
And I'm Izzy Olson, and we're going to jump right into probably the most difficult
I'd say the difficult
of owning acreage property in northern Colorado, and that is the soil types that we have here, which may be very different from where you're relocating from. Expansive clay is the most common soil type that you're going to find here in northern Colorado, and whether you're buying acreage property or a single family home in a lot block neighborhood, it's still something that you need to pay attention to and be aware of. And so it's a heaving soil.
Yep, heaving soil.
Heaving soil, and so it's expands up to 20% in volume when wet, and then shrinks back down and can crack. And so, I mean, have you seen the house on First Street? So insane. Okay.
Yep.
There is a house in Loveland that I drive by all the time, and it's like monstrous cracks up the sides. The roof line is all wavy, which is another sign of like a serious foundation issue. You'll find like in some homes too, like there'll be cracks up the walls, but I'd say unless if it's true cracks that are in, which say most of the house.
Yeah, hairline cracks are typically a fine thing that you see, especially the vertical ones, especially when you go into an unfinished basement.
Yeah.
The minute you start seeing those large horizontal cracks across the foundation or cracks that are bigger than a few centimeters, it's probably time to start worrying about it and maybe even looking into getting an engineer.
Yeah. And so you'll see foundation shifting. That's like the biggest issue. You'll see it in driveways. That could be fixed a lot easier. Front patios. It's really common here. I've done so many inspections where people are like, what is that? And a lot of times, like sometimes you can just mud jack it.
Yep.
And so it just depends. But when it's the foundation, that's a serious issue. And then when we're talking about acreage properties, in terms of being able to build, would you say that makes it easier?
Yeah, it does.
But then if you're buying a home that already has a foundation issue, then that is something to pay attention to, because it is very common here in northern Colorado.
So other than the expansive clays we have here, which typically go from the western slopes of Colorado, northern Colorado, and you even have some just around the areas of Loveland, Fort Collins, and other northern Colorado towns, you do have pockets of alluvial and loamy soils, which you'll typically find more in the farmland areas of northern Colorado. So if you bought a home where it was farmed at one point, or someone did some serious work to the soils long time ago, more than likely the clay has been mixed out or has been taken out, and you're going to have more of a alluvial loamy soil. The best way you can tell when you dig into the ground, if you're planting a tree or planting a bush, you dig down, clay's pretty easy to tell. When you dig up a loamy soil, it's a very soft, darker soil, and it's really great for planting and having vegetable gardens and everything like that. So there's a lot of places around downtown Fort Collins that have it, a lot of places where the older midtown of Fort Collins is at. The further you expand out, the more you're going to run into those clay soils. So, but alluvial soils, they're really great for building in. Some of the big things that you might do is they have to excavate out a little bit just to get a little bit more room to be able to put a little bit better of a foundation in. But they are going to be a lot less of a problematic issue. Being on an acreage in northern Colorado, though, the likelihood of having a loamy soil, unless you're kind of out more east or, again, where some of these older farms were at, the likelihood is relatively low. So just be more prepared for that clay soil that you're going to run into. Otherwise, we will at some point on this next one talk about rocky soils that you're going to find up in the foothills, where you're going to get great views, but depending on if you're building or buying a home, looking at those soil types are going to be major. And so having that rocky gravel soil, you're going to find it on the foothills of Fort Collins. Every house I've ever looked at in Fort Collins that are on the foothills, up near LaPorte, up in Estes Park, they're going to be built on heavy rock soils. And when I lived in Montana, same thing. It was just rocks all over the place. The biggest thing that comes with that, you have great foundations that can be built on rocky soils. Estes Park, you're really never going to see heaving bad soils up there. They're going to be pretty well set, and a lot of times they're going to build them into the rocks. The worst part you're going to run into cost-wise, and this is what I've heard why Estes Park houses can be more expensive than places down here, and the houses that are up in the mountains can be more expensive, is that to try and even build a foundation or try to put a basement in some of those places, to try and dig down, even with excavators and big heavy equipment, the cost is just exuberant. The time that it takes is exuberant. So just be prepared for the cost, especially when building or looking at a house, that's something that you need to factor in when you're looking at a place up in the foothills, Estes Park, Poudre Canyon, versus someplace that's on the east side of the mountains, closer to the Fort Collins foothills.
Sweet. Another great consideration when relocating to northern Colorado and looking into buying an acreage property is your water. Now, in our last video, and make sure to check out part 1 if you haven't already. It was a while ago.
Yeah.
It was.
It's been a minute.
It was a while ago, but it's the video with me and Connor in it. But we talked about different ways of getting water, so that's cistern, wells, and then tapping into the city system. But today we're going to go in a little bit more in depth with the wells, as that's what I feel like everybody wants.
Yep.
That's usually a preference. We did talk about in the other video the downside of cistern, but then also the pros of having a city tap versus the other options. So the first type of well is a household well, household use only well, sorry. And so this is usually for if you have about less than 35 acres, it's for a single family home, and mainly for your indoor water only. You are not able to water your livestock with this. There are some limitations if you have like a lawn you want to water. It just depends on how much you have.
Or if you have a garden or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
There's limitations on just how much water you can use for exterior use versus interior use, and the majority of it is going to be interior use.
And the flow rate is usually less than or about 15 gallons a minute.
Yep. And that's typically what you're going to see on most properties. If you go look at existing properties on acreages, more than likely they're going to have the household use well. So that is a big factor. Like, I know Izzy wants to run an entire farm and stuff, so she wouldn't probably want to have a house out in the middle of nowhere with just a household use, because otherwise she's going to be taking 5-gallon buckets out to go water her horses every day and cows and pigs. And so it's just something that you want to keep very aware of, whether you're building or not building. It's just something that comes up that most people don't think about. And more than likely, unless it's larger, which is a domestic and livestock well, that's going to be typically your parcels that are 35 acres or bigger. Most of the time you're going to see these more on the eastern side of Colorado, northern side of Colorado. The smaller lot sizes are harder to get, so you will see a lot more 35-acre lots out here in northern Colorado. So
that makes so much sense.
Why?
Because there's so many 35-acre lots around here.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
It's amazing how many we have. So if you want large acreage land, very easy here. If you want a 5 to 10 acre lot, a lot harder, way more expensive.
Which is so weird.
It shouldn't be that way, but that's how it works.
That's how it is.
So, but yeah, 35-acre parcel is, you need to have a 35-acre parcel or more to have a domestic and livestock well. And so that's one where you can use it for your household. You can use it for livestock. You can use it for irrigation. There's always a limit on them as well, especially because you're digging it out of the ground. You have aquifers down there, so it is something that's going to be limited on what you have and the capacity. Typically, the flow rate's going to be anywhere between that 15 to 30 gallons per minute, which is a really heck of a good deal. So if you do find lots that have that already on it versus having to dig your own, which we talked about in the first video, digging your own well it can be just a little scary because it's a lot of money you could put into and you don't know how much it's going to cost or if you're even going to hit water. So if you find a piece of land that already has a well that's active on it and that has good numbers to it, jump on those right away because they can be a little risky depending on where you're at. Yeah, you're just not going to find these on very small acreages. It's pretty rare unless they were grandfathered in at some point or someone subdivided it and you got lucky and that domestic well was on a smaller one. And so the biggest thing that we want to pull away from these wells is if you're going to be buying a pre-existing home or building a new home, make sure you know what type of well is on there. Not the fact that it just has a well, because you don't know what that means. And you don't know what the flow rate is. So make sure that agent or whoever you're going to be working with is making sure they're really doing their due diligence when looking at the well permits, who did the well, XYZ. And that's something that I think is as important as like the soil types that you're going to be in depending on what you're doing.
If you are considering buying a home with a well, it's really important that you talk with your agent and make sure that they can find out some specifics about the well, just so that you know exactly what you're getting into when you buy your home. So you do want to, as we just talked about, confirm the permit type. Is it a domestic livestock well or is it a household only well? If you're wanting to have animals, that definitely makes a really big difference, and making sure that it matches your intended use. You want to check the water quality, so testing for bacteria, nitrates, metals, and radon as well. That could get pretty dangerous if you just kind of moved in and just started drinking it and you did. I mean, because you could be buying a home that hasn't had anyone live in it for a while.
Yeah, we don't live on the Oregon Trail no more, so making sure we check up on our water and not get dysentery is pretty important these days.
You also want to inspect the pump and the system age. Pumps last about 10 to 20 years, and they cost between $3,000 and $10,000 to replace, just depending on the system. Water yield, super important, so the gallons per minute or GPM. This is what we were talking about earlier with the 15 to 30. Making sure that it meets your household and irrigation needs, whatever they may be. And there is a map you can look at for this for Northern Colorado. It's pretty cool. So it'll tell you that. And then you can also just check legal compliance, making sure that you're not using the well inappropriately, because then that can result in fines. And then finding out if the well has ever run dry. How would you find something out like that?
The biggest thing that you'd find out is through a company that does wells, so they'll be able to go in and make that determination. It's all just a cost at the end of the day, but there are telltale signs that typically come up that someone who actually is involved with wells on a daily basis can tell pretty quick.
If the property you're looking at does not have a well and you are interested in seeing how to put one on, the first thing that I would probably do if I was working with you is I would open up the well map for Northern Colorado and just see what wells are in the area around the home. Now, the Colorado water table is very unique, and so your neighbor may have dug 20 feet and then your other neighbor may have dug 800 feet. So there's no guarantee, and I've seen that in Wellington.
Yep.
There's no guarantee, but just knowing what your neighbors have, if they all are digging, I don't know, between 100 and 200 feet, I feel like that's pretty good, right?
Yep, that's a typical.
And getting a pretty good flow rate, or the GPM we were talking about, then it may be worth seeing, what it would be like to put a well on, and also I guess your financial position as well. So you want to confirm eligibility for the well permit through whatever county it is that you are interested in. So that would be Weld or Larimer up here, and just determine the use of the well and just start that process.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that's the biggest factor is do what she says. Have someone that's going to go look at the neighbors, because you're gambling at that point when you're trying to put a well in.
Blind.
So the more you know, the better off you're going to be. And there's experts like Izzy and me who can go out there and really help you guys out, make determinations if it makes sense or not. Because if a piece of land is very cheap, there's typically a reason for it.
Yeah.
So just because it looks like it's a great price discount, know that there's probably some issue and someone's already figured that out before us. All right, but otherwise, the second thing we want to look at is applying for the well permit. You're typically going to spend anywhere between $1,000 to $3,000 based off of your multiple factors, whether it's the site plan, intended use, and what your estimated depth and flow is going to be. The permit process, typically, from what we see in Northern Colorado, is going to be 1 to 3 months. It depends on how busy they are. Back when we were a little bit more active in terms of market, well permits and things like that were getting pulled pretty quickly, and there was a lot of them, so it was taking a little bit longer. But now people are slowing down a little bit, so getting a well permit, just like other things like going to the DMV, is getting a little bit easier. And so that's a nice part. So when they go and do a permit pull, they may require you to do certain studies, hydrological studies. They might want to look at the land, check out things like that, to really make sure that they understand how much this is going to cost. So if they do like a hydrological study, or they're going to go out and look at the land, you can look at another $2,000 to $5,000 cost. So this is hopefully already showing you guys just how important it is to try and find a pre-existing well if you can, because the costs just continually can add up over time. So during that permit process, they're going to determine the depth of the groundwater. They're going to determine what soil types you have, because it makes such a difference on what kind of aquifers you're going to have around your area. And then they're going to consider the impact on the area. So because Colorado is an area where just because you own the land, you don't own the water underneath you. It's everybody's water underneath you. So you could be stealing from someone or from some other area or from some pond or creek, because that aquifer goes somewhere or could go somewhere. So just be prepped to know that even if you start all these studies, there is the possibility that they could nix your project because, hey, this aquifer underneath this property is going to go to someone else's property. Otherwise, step 3 is going into the fun part of the drilling and installation. So depending on who you hire, it is going to cost anywhere between $30 to $80 a foot, depending on the soil types. Like we were talking above, rocky soils, hard to drill through, so be prepped for a very expensive one. If you want to be on the top of the mountains, I had a couple people get estimates for that, and it was $80,000 to $100,000 just for a well when you put them on the top of a foothill or something like that. The drilling also includes casing, pump installation, and depending on that cost, you're going to be looking at $3,000 to $8,000, depending on what kind of pump you're going to be putting in or what type of casing you're going to have for your well as well. And then optional wise, depending on where you live, we talked about cisterns. If you're not getting that flow rate correct, you can always do a cistern that they can put in. Or also we talked about water treatment. No one likes dysentery, so putting in a water treatment is very important. I have someone who lives out in Livermore that I helped. They have a system that is about $3,000 to $4,000 that collects up the red sediment from the soils that come out of their well, and then they have really good fresh drinking water. So the cost for all that, you're looking at $500 to $5,000 for treatment or cistern. So overall, you're still looking at the $30,000 minimum, and just depending on how deep you got to go, it goes up from there. The only other thing that I'll just briefly talk about, but not going to share much on it, is just going to be water rights. So water rights in Colorado is something that you can buy and attach to lands, and it's something that is pretty particular. There's a lot of pieces to it, so we didn't want to just discuss it in this video, but if you guys ever want to learn about water rights or what that means, especially if you're wanting to start a farm or do stuff with animals, reach out to us, because we can go further in depth on, what water shares mean, what water rights mean, and how you can obtain them and keep them and, be able to buy them for future uses.
The next thing we want to touch on, and we're not going to go over it too in depth, is mineral rights. If it is something you have more questions on, or you're considering relocating here and buying a property, feel free to reach out to us and we'll go into it some more. But we did just want to preface on owning an acreage property that has mineral rights attached to it, finding out who owns those mineral rights, because if it's an oil gas company, there is a high likelihood, there is a chance that they could drill under your property if they have mineral rights.
Yep.
And put a natural gas line under your home. So.
Yeah, there are certain rules and regulations that do protect you that Larimer County, Weld County do have in place to help them keep it from digging up underneath your house or super close to your house. But mineral rights are something that you want to just take a look at, because they can impact you at some point depending on who the owner is. All right, so now we got through all that BS. Now we move on to the fun part of actually maintaining your acreage. This is the part that I love. This is what I've done for a long time, so I get pretty giddy about it.
He likes to mow.
Yeah, I do. I like striping my yard.
Yeah. You have a riding lawnmower for your yard, don't you?
No, I got a little push mower now.
Oh, okay.
Now I can really stripe it.
Okay.
I put my little signature in it.
Oh my gosh. So mowing, that's important, especially if you have, a huge lawn. You definitely need to take care of that. Having a riding lawnmower makes it more enjoyable.
Yep. So typically, you'll do like a 0-turn mower for like around the house, but depending on the size of your acreage, like mowing 5 to 10 acres, most people keep it natural, so you don't always have to do that. But it is nice to get grass and weeds away from the house as much as you can. So, if you're bougie enough to own a larger tractor with a mowing deck on it or a brush hog, going out and mowing the actual entire field becomes easier. Or you can typically find a neighbor that has one that will do it for $50 to $100. Otherwise, mowing typically is just right around the house, and typically you just need to mow your yard. Otherwise, nature is pretty nice to have, so you just kind of leave most of it uncut, unless you're obviously worried about fire or something like that close to it.
I was gonna say, with fire, obviously living in a more rural part of northern Colorado does increase the chances of fire. I do know that you can have like local authorities come out and do an assessment of your property and just kind of help you, tell you what to do to correct and mitigate, just to decrease the chances. And I know, like, I just saw a listing the other day where like every tree around the house was singed. Like, it was like the house singed, shed singed. And I'm sure you look at that and you're like, oh, that's scary, but it's like, it's not going to happen again, because the fire's gone through. Yep. It will happen eventually, but like, it's already cleaned everything out. So it's actually safer, even though I think I would look at it and be like, I don't want my property to catch on fire. But clearly they did a good job because the house is still there. So fire protection is important. And then weeding, like, you don't want to have, obviously, like, invasive weeds?
Yeah, so weeds are,
Like
you
goat
know,
heads.
they're just a pain in the butt. You know, I deal with them on a yearly basis. I take care of a 6-acre property, and no matter what you do, you're going to get weeds. Downy brome is a big one that comes up. It's a grass, but it's very highly flammable. So killing downy brome and then reseeding with something natural, you know, in terms of like a grama or you could even do fescues or something like that. You know, you just create a little bit more protection. You also have goat heads, which I think almost anybody in northern Colorado has had to deal with those once or before. If it's gotten stuck in your dog's foot, or
Oh,
you're
for
walking
sure.
around barefoot yourself and get them stuck in your shoes, or you ride your bike a little bit off of a path and then all of a sudden you got 2 flat tires. Going out there and killing those on a constant basis, it'll overall make your property more valuable because the less you have of gross, nasty weeds, the less someone's going to notice that, especially if you are looking at an acreage. And it just keeps the property just well maintained. Otherwise, the other big thing with weeding is you're going to create bare spots. So replanting stuff, whether it be a grass or something else, is a huge deal for keeping erosion off your property. We don't get that much rain here and that much snow up in northern Colorado, but it can affect the erosion. My parents live out in Platteville, Colorado, on a very sandy spot. So anytime it rained there when they first built their home, erosion around the foundation was pretty bad. And so they had to go in there and do rocks and just something to keep the soils from just getting sucked away from the foundation. And that's just a good protection. Otherwise, the only other thing that I do recommend is going out and planting as many trees as you possibly can. I think trees on acreages is a huge thing for wind barrier. No matter where you are in northern Colorado, you're going to get some wind. So having a wind barrier is pretty nice. Keeps erosion down, allows you to have privacy and protection for your home, and overall just creates a better looking property. When you look at a property that's got 200
Barren.
trees on it versus a property that has nothing on it.
Yeah.
It's amazing what just a few trees do
Yeah.
at the end of the day. So that's just my last little piece of advice. If you are going to buy an acreage, set aside some money because trees are expensive to actually put them in at some point. And then Colorado's Forestry Service actually sells baby sapling seeds that you can buy in the spring every year. A lot cheaper way to do it, about $2 to $3 per sprig. And I went out and planted 250 of them this last year.
Wow.
And they're already about 2 foot tall at this point.
What?
So there are ways to cheapen it up versus going to a nursery. So side note, don't mean to go off on that, but it's well worth it. And feel free to reach out if you guys need that contact.
That's great. I didn't know they grow that fast.
Yeah.
So there you have it. That's probably way more than you needed to know about buying acreage in northern Colorado, but they're all very important things. And I feel like every year I have more and more people who have the dream of moving out here and buying land, building a home, and it's just like things that are really important to consider. So
I think that's it.
I think that's it.
Peace.